Good afternoon and welcome to the BSI webinar that we're running, which we're running following the publication of our standard on menstruation, menstrual health and menopause, which is known by the snappy number of BS 30416. It published and launched in the summer, and we're really delighted with its progress so far, with sort of approaching 7,000 downloads. So we really believe that this is a standard that is helping organisations handle some of the challenges people have at various stages of their life. Last Wednesday, on World Menopause Awareness Day, we published the little book of menstruation, menstrual health and menopause, which is a short guide to help people handle the subject when they want to talk to other people. So we very much encourage you, if you haven't already downloaded it, to go and download that, as it can help you have conversations in your organisations. So you know who I am. I'm your host today. My name's Anne Hayes, and I'm the Director of Sectors at BSI, and have worked closely with the team in BSI who have developed the standard and the work that we've done. We are delighted with our panel of speakers and feel we are really lucky to have so many of the right people here to provide advice, and actually, really importantly, case studies where organisations are starting to turn their attention to supporting their people. And after all, that is what we want: people that are supported and enabled and able to run their lives both home and at work as they want, as they go through the various stages in their life. As with all good webinars, we've got a couple of housekeeping points we just want to make you aware of. The webinar is being recorded. It is interactive, so hopefully you will post your questions. You are all on mute, so we will pick up your questions and put them to the panelists in the Q&A session. If you are having any technical difficulties, please go via the Q&A button and our technical team will respond. And finally, just on questions, we will endeavour to answer as many as we can in the time we have available. Just wanted to remind you all that we're not covering today the elements of symptom management or HRT in connection with menopause. And so just ask you that when it comes to Q&A that you remember this, because we anticipate having quite a number of questions, and if you can help us sort those as we go, that would be very much appreciated. And the other thing, just to be clear on, the standard and all the work and the way everybody talks is fully inclusive. The term women may be used throughout these presentations, but that is a decision that was taken as the standard and the work is being developed. But actually everything has been fully considered to be fully inclusive. Turning to our first speaker, I am honoured and delighted to welcome Mims Davis MP, who is the Minister for Social Mobility, Youth and Progression. She was appointed to the Under Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions in October 22, and has been in many other departments, the Home Office, DCMS as it was, and previously Parliamentary Under Secretary to the State for Wales. So I'm really chuffed that she's been able to join us today, and really so grateful for the time that you're giving us. So I'm now going to hand over to Mims. Mims, you might be on mute. Still on mute.
Sorry, I did some sticky buttons here, but we got there. Sorry, welcome to my slightly messy here locally. Hopefully you can hear me, Anne, and thank you for the very, very warm welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me, the team at BSI. It's been a pleasure working with you on what is a really important subject, and thank you so much for the kind welcome. So today we are discussing menstruation, menstrual health, menopause in the workplace in terms of guidance. And you're probably thinking, why on earth is the Minister for Social Mobility, Youth and Progression here today from DWP? And the reason that I'm here is because my big focus is around women in the workplace at any age and any career stage, whether it is from starting off your career with a focus on young women, or indeed making sure that as you progress through your career and perhaps need our help or wider government support, that it's there for you and I have a wide-ranging portfolio which covers wider disadvantaged groups, refugees, those coming from Ukraine, as I say, younger people, those leaving prison, care leavers, and wider. So it's a real honour to talk to you today about this matter, which is something that I've been passionately interested in, and really taking some steps from other women who've gone before, really making this mainstream and tackling the challenges. Now, tackling inactivity more widely, and particularly supporting people to stay and progress in work, is a key government priority, and I've just given you a wider context for that. Supporting women experiencing menopause impact at work really helps deliver this, and it's about tackling those with those debilitating symptoms and those real impacts, which is what we're absolutely focused on. Now, we know that if more women remained in work, worked for longer where they wanted to, and were able to stay and retain in higher paid roles, not only would it result in positive outcomes for our economy and for society, but for better pension provision for women, improved health and well-being for those individuals as well. Now, with around 4.5 million women aged 50 to 64 employed in the UK, there are few workplaces where menopause impact is not being experienced by staff. Women over 50 represent the fastest growing group in the workforce. And I'm always very mindful behind every statistic that we're talking about here is a person, a story, a situation to understand. And that's where I think if you get it right as a government, you've got a chance. Now, the good news for us all is that societal taboo around menopause is starting to shift and lift, but we know more needs to be done. And of course, this is Menopause Awareness Month. We've had the days focused in Parliament, and a huge amount of work across the all-party group from colleagues such as Caroline Harris from Labour and Rachel McLean from our party. When she first joined Westminster, women have come together and spoken about it. But it's key that we get our employers involved and helping with that societal shift, so that we don't continue to lose women's talent. We can't afford it. We need their wealth of experience in our workplaces and in our sectors. And we have seen over 2.1 million more women joining the workforce since 2010. With improved childcare, we know nothing here is simple, but we do know, because of that fastest growing group, the reason that we need to focus on this. So supporting women experiencing menopausal symptoms to stay and thrive in the workplace is a topic that I'm really passionate about delivering on. It's all very well to be passionate, but let's make that change and make that impact. And with the right support, we know that women can go on and arguably have the best part of their career through this stage. But I'm very mindful perimenopause and menopause can impact at any age or career stage equally. Now, I see the BSI standard and guidance as a great way to support this, and thank you for all the support you've given us in raising this issue and contextualising this opportunity to support women more roundly. It's an important challenge too, because too many women do feel that despite this change and this shift, that they have to leave the workforce or step back, not just because of menopause, but it's coinciding perhaps with caring responsibilities or wider health impacts or other things going on in their lives too. And multiple studies seem to suggest that 10% of women left their jobs directly because of menopause symptoms. Now, with the right information and support, and we heard from earlier, we're not talking about the health side of this, but if all of that is in conjunction, that doesn't need to be the case. With a greater focus on women's health and work throughout their lives, broadening these conversations about health and well-being from menstruation through to menopause, the wider considerations are really vital. And I think this BSI guidance that covers menstruation and wider women's health is really important. Again, it means that we can tackle that taboo and really work to make changes. Now, part of the work on menopause has to include the question about how we involve men as allies across different sectors, men as partners, husbands, family members, to make sure that those we're working with, that we love, that we need to understand why this matter is part of the conversation. Now, that the conversation has started, largely among women bringing men into the conversation, but it's important to recognise this issue affects everyone, as I say, from work relationships to home relationships. And what I found quite fascinating in the work that we've done at DWP was just how much men have actively, positively come into the conversation, and thank them for that. It has been 6 months since I appointed Helen Tomlinson, who's with us today, who's amazing, as the government's first ever menopause employment champion. And we are seeing firsthand the progress that's being made by partnerships with yourselves and everyone on the call, and the energy that she is bringing, and wider influences that have already been there, which has really been encouraging. And also that business has engaged with us and more widely on forums and roundtables nationwide to recognise the importance of supporting employees with menopause symptoms, sharing best practice that's already in place, and also those employers who are impacted at home by menopause impact as well. We've heard from those in heavier industry where perhaps sleep and other stressful impacts of menopause are affecting partners, and that's affecting them too. So I know Helen is going to be speaking to you shortly about this very thing, so I'm not going to say any more than that. But we've been from Solent University to Swansea Business School to West Ham to the amazing Premier League football club to have these conversations. And Helen's passion, commitment and knowledge to keep women thriving in the workplace is absolutely brilliant. And this is what it's all about, to keep women fully supported in the workplace in order for them to continue to progress and contribute with confidence, building both their careers and their pensions. And this will not only help people to flourish, those individuals, but unleash the full potential of UK businesses, large and small, and our whole economy. And I do want to remind people, although the focus isn't today on health, the health side of it more fully, but there is work going on across Government Equalities Office and the Department for Health and Social Care on the Women's Health Strategy, starting to break down the wider barriers when it comes to health in terms of women's participation in the labour market, and also making sure employers feel well equipped to support their female employees, have those conversations and have that support in place for them. And what's really encouraging is to see the positive signs of change, the erosion, as I say, of taboos, to talk more generally across society with the help of very high profile figures. We all know who they are, and really to defy those menopausal stereotypes. We've also had the debate Parliament just today, and also Menopause the Musical is now in its 13th year, and I've seemed to have missed that. I remember the vagina monologues, but I seem to have missed that one. It's very pleasing to see more large organisations really helping to support and start this and take action on education and allyship and really help that cultural change that I've spoken about. But what is promising is this partnership with smaller organisations as well, because it makes that business sense for employers to really put the effort to support their employees, to be reassuring that the changes, particularly around menopause, inevitably there's worry that it's going to create a cost. It won't. Generally, it won't cost a penny, and you'll retain and support the staff that you need. And simple adjustments can make working lives more manageable, and they can really make a difference. And it matters to me as well as a DWP minister. 64% of our DWP workforce are female, up and down the land, 900 buildings in every community full of people, and 64% of them are women. So we do our bit to support our workforce, and we need and want to do more. We have an active menopause network, 350 menopause ambassadors. We've signed up, as has the civil service as a whole, to the Wellbeing of Women Menopause Workplace Pledge, which is a brilliant pledge, and thank you to all involved in that. It's a really positive indication that your workforce and its potential employees are supported, including 650,000 women who we're working with at DWP who are in receipt of universal credit. They won't all be on benefits and not working. They might be working and having that benefit to support them. So we need to make sure that this is a conversation we're having with our claimants and those we're seeking to support more roundly. So we need to continue to push on this cultural shift. The amount of businesses who've downloaded the BSI standard on menstruation, menstrual health and menopause has been incredible. It's now up to 7,000 downloads, I believe. It's probably changed since these notes were written to me. And what's really important, and thank you, BSI, it sets out really practical recommendations for workplace adjustments, strategies to help employers to meet the needs of those experiencing the impact of menstruation and on their health and a wider menopause. And the standard is free of charge. It's universal, it's applicable to all businesses. And I'm really pleased that it covers that wider part of menstruation in the workplace as well. And what's been really interesting talking to younger women, and I know I had it with my own mum, it's been something that's, you know, now being talked about as something that happens to women as a whole. We understand the impact of periods, and this is making it generally easier for all employers to talk about those wider issues and implement those changes and support in the workplace. So to conclude, thank you so much for this standard. I highly recommend and encourage employers, large and small, to access it, to kickstart those workplace conversations. And can I take the opportunity to thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I look forward to the Q&A later and the comments, and I really appreciate your insight and working with us on this. So back to you, Anne, and thank you all.
Minister, thank you so much for those words, and thank you for joining us, and we're really delighted that you can be with us later on for Q&A, so thank you. So moving on to our next speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to have with us Helen Tomlinson, who's going to consider what government are doing in this space. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Helen, she is the UK's first ever menopause champion, as the Minister's already mentioned, and works alongside the Department for Work and Pensions to help employers develop policies that empower women experiencing menopause to stay and progress. But in addition to that role, she is also head of talent for UK and Ireland for the Adecco Group, the global leader in HR solutions. And her pioneering podcast on menopause and work inspired the Adecco Group to design and implement one of the UK's first corporate menopause policies. So Helen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to hand over to you straight away.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much everybody at BSI for inviting me, and thank you to the Minister for covering quite a bit of what I'm going to cover already, so maybe I'll shorten my bit a little bit, but we are very much aligned in you know, the work that we are doing, so it makes total sense that we have the same aspiration and the same desire to see cultural change in organisations, which is amazing. So I was appointed into this role as the Menopause Employment Champion in March of this year, and that came around as a part of the recommendation of the Women and Equality Select Committee and also the 50+ Champions report from a group of sector heads that worked with DWP across 5 key sectors and looked at the challenges that women and people who go through menopause were facing in those particular sectors and what could be done to support them. So I've been in the post roughly about 6 months, or I was on World Menopause Day, and at that point we launched our 6-month report, and we called it No Time to Step Back, because I firmly believe, having been in the world of work now for probably coming up to 30 years, I absolutely believe that going through perimenopause, menopause, and receiving the right support has allowed me to go on and thrive in my career. And I'm a huge advocate for that, and to hold employers accountable to make sure that they don't lose the talent that women are leaving leadership roles at the fastest rate ever, and according to the McKinsey report of 2022, and the challenge is they're not being replaced by other women leaders, and that is a problem because generationally that's not being seen. If you can't see it, you can't be it. So we are not seeing as many women leaders. So therefore, it's not seen as aspirational. So we need to make sure that we retain talent. You know, I work in the field of talent and we're in a talent scarce market. So it's really important that employers do everything they can to retain that talent and allow women to go on and really thrive in those, what you probably term latter stages of career, and take with them a fulfilling career which allows them to then feed into their pension pot for later life. So we called it No Time to Step Back, and so the report can be found on the gov.uk website, and that outlines basically the research that I've spent the last 6 months doing, talking to employers, employees, etc., and really building up a picture of what it's like for women in the workplace. I feel relatively lucky. I work for an organisation who are incredibly receptive. We would absolutely say we've seen a cultural change over the last 2 years. Since we launched our policy, I'm in one of our large offices today, and I nipped to the ladies earlier, and there's a copy of the symptom checker on the back of the toilet door. There's free sanitary products in the toilets, and those are just some of the steps that we've taken that we now see as just part and parcel of the workplace. So it has been a real journey in that period of time, which we're really delighted about. But from the research that I've done in the last 6 months, not every organisation has that in place. And what I did find was a lot of large organisations were doing some really great stuff, but I wasn't seeing that so much in the SME sector. And it could be simply because they don't have the resource, they don't have anybody who's willing to lead on it, they don't know where to start, etc., or it's just not on their radar. But what that means for the employees who work in the SME sector, they're not getting the support that they need from their employer. And the risk to the employer is that they will then move on and either leave the workplace altogether or take their talent to another organisation. So the 4-point plan that comes out of the report, the No Time to Step Back report, is essentially built on education, allyship, lived experience, and that's what creates the cultural change in organisations. But I'm absolutely passionate about the fact that it is for all women everywhere, regardless of their ethnicity, their cultural backgrounds, their socio-economic demographic, or the organisation that they choose to work for, whether that be a large corporate with an HR lead, an ED&I lead, wherever that role sits, or they choose to work in a smaller environment. And the reason that I say that and I labour that point is because everything that is part of the strategy and the 4-point plan is free at point of access, and I'm really passionate about that it shouldn't be whether your employer can afford it or whether you can afford to find that resource, etc. So that's why I'm so delighted to be supporting the standard, because it absolutely is free of charge. It's incredibly comprehensive, and it can either be downloaded in its full form or you can use the little book to get started. And if you follow that, it will give you everything you need to be able to support the organisation. So the 4-point plan is effectively about sharing best practice, and as the Minister alluded to, I've been delighted with the fact that we started off with a cross-sector roundtable a few weeks ago now, and we had key employers from the 5 sectors that we are working with, and those sectors are retail, hospitality, manufacturing, care, and professional and technical. And we also had the sector bodies from those key sectors as well. And we got around the table and I outlined what our strategy is, what our plans are, and asked them if they would share their best practice on the portal. It's the Help to Grow portal that the government already have. And we have, it's basically for employers and employees to help to attract and retain talent in their organisation, and we are using that to house that best practice in our menopause in the workplace section. And all of those employers came together and said, we would be delighted to share our resource, share our best practice, share some case studies for the benefit of organisations that don't have that in place already. So that's really exciting. And then in November, we've got 5 sector specific roundtables where we bring more employers to the table, and hopefully they will do the same and share the great work that they're doing so everybody can benefit from it, which I think is a really positive step. The second aspect of it is a national allyship programme. I spoke to a lot of women who were really struggling with their symptoms, whether they be the practical symptoms or the psychological symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. And they felt like they had nobody to talk to. They felt like they had no alternative but to leave their role because they couldn't start the conversation with their employer for whatever reason. And in addition to that best practice, and we hope that that will, it will be a lot easier in the future for that to happen. However, it's really important to have somebody to talk to, and a lot of large employers already have allyship programs, menopause champions, networks, etc. This afternoon is my the Adecco Group's Hot Topics network, and that is dedicated to perimenopause and menopause. So having someone to talk to, just to share symptoms, experiences, products that you might have seen, articles that you might have read before you may go on to seek some really professional, external advice, having that buddy is really important. So having a national allyship programme is something that we will be launching on International Women's Day, so that somebody who works in a small environment or maybe doesn't have anybody in their own workplace to talk to can reach out to somebody in the same sector as them and have a conversation with them and get that support, get that buddy aspect to it, to really see how they can get better support in their workplace. The third aspect of it is the Menopause Workplace Pledge that the Minister talked about earlier. The Wellbeing of Women charity have created the pledge, again free of charge to sign up for an employer, but is also a badge almost to help women to make good choices about who they're going to work for in the future. And if they are looking for another role, whether they be the women that we talked about that are currently not in the workplace and looking to come back, we know when you've been out of work for a period of time, there can be barriers to coming back to work. I've worked with the long-term unemployed throughout my career, and I don't want perimenopause or menopause to be a barrier to women coming back into the workplace. So the allyship programme will be going live in the spring of 2024. And the Menopause Workplace Pledge can be signed at any time. So really positive action there. And as you can see, I am just one person and I have got a day job as well. However, I've been absolutely delighted that not only have all the sector bodies come together and some key employers to say, we absolutely want to support you, we absolutely want to drive this forward. I've got a number of strategic partners that I'm working with to help to amplify the messaging and make sure all women everywhere know that there is support there for them from an employer and employee perspective. And the BSI are one of those great champions that is helping me to get that messaging out there to women in the workplace throughout the country. And so the final thing that I just wanted to say was, take a look at the report, see what's going to be happening moving forward. I feel that we've made some really strong steps, but I absolutely know there's a lot of work still to do, but I'm passionate about driving it forward. And I am equally passionate about the work that BSI are doing with the standard. The fact that it's free of charge for everybody is perfect. And I also love the fact that it covers menstrual health, menstruation and menopause, because 44% of women really struggle with heavy periods during perimenopause. It's not an easy conversation to have with a line manager in the workplace, particularly if you are in one of those non-autonomous roles where you can't choose to work from home, you can't choose to get up and go to the bathroom at a moment's notice, and often it's not even a moment's notice. So that's really, really important that any employer can access that, and it's free of charge, and it is absolutely inclusive in that it broadens out that conversation, not only for women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, but it starts to look at the intergenerational aspect of menstruation in the workplace as well. So opening up the conversation. So Mim's referred to her mum in the conversation. My mum never had a conversation with me about menopause, but arguably I hope that this is a once in a generation aspect of it, and that my daughter, who's 24 and just starting out in the workplace, isn't attending sessions like this, because it is such part and parcel of a woman's experience in work that it absolutely goes without saying that that support will be there for them. Thank you.
Helen, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I too had a mother who never spoke about it. It was all a secret. Now I'm delighted to welcome Trishna Madessa Parak, who is an associate and employment law specialist from Brabner's, to help talk through the legal aspects for menstruation and menopause in the workplace. She was very much involved in the development of the new standard that you've heard about today, and we're incredibly grateful to her for her time that she's put into it, because actually having that legal view on things really makes a difference. And so without further ado, I'm going to quickly hand over to you, Trishna.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I am not in control of my slides, so please do forgive me that I'm going to be saying next slide, please. And on that note, Sam, if I can have the next slide, please. So I'm very humbled to be here today and to have been part of contributing towards the BSI standard, and to be here speaking to you with such stellar other speakers that are involved doing some fantastic work, as we've heard already, some of that. I thought I'd just very quickly start by explaining why I'm here today, what Brabner's have been involved with and why. And around 2.5 years ago, we at Brabner's launched a reproductive health campaign, which was alongside our day-to-day jobs as being lawyers. And the intention of the campaign was to be part of, or to help start the conversation around reproductive health in the workplace, which includes menstruation, menopause, but other topics that are slightly wider than that, such as fertility, IVF, baby loss, miscarriage, pregnancy, maternity, and underpinning all of that, mental health and well-being in the workplace as well. And we felt that our position as a law firm, advising clients from SMEs to your mid-sized to your large corporations, acting as a trusted advisor, we were in a position of influence to help our clients and contacts to start the conversations, to start thinking about how they can support their employees. And we've done some fantastic work here internally, and there's a landing page on this slide if you're interested. One of the most proudest moments of which was contributing to the standard itself. So if I can have the next slide, please. The Minister has already touched on why menstruation and menopause is so important in the workplace. And to kind of expand on that a little bit, as discussed, more people than ever are experiencing menopause during their working life. And I attended some menopause champion training that was delivered by Henpicked very recently. And to put it into context, the statistics that were used really helped me to kind of get my head around that. So I thought I'd share that today, which was that around 100 years ago, the average life expectancy was 59, and the average age for menopause was about 57. So it was very much an end of life event. In 2020, the average life expectancy for females was about 82, and I believe the current average age for menopause is 51, albeit it can, of course, happen much sooner or later than that. So many women are now still in work, and as the Minister said earlier, women are also the fastest growing group in the workforce. They make up some of the best skills and talent across multiple industries, and there is no compulsory retirement age, so there shouldn't be any reason why women who want to remain in work shouldn't be able to, particularly when it's because of health related challenges that are inevitable and can't be avoided. Regarding menstruation, it's estimated that 15 million women in the UK menstruate, and based on the ONS figures, around 72% of these women were in the workforce in 2020. So that's around just short of 11 million people who menstruate every month, and of course during perimenopause may have debilitating pain and heavier periods than they're perhaps used to. And the average time frame for an individual to menstruate is around 40 years in most cases. So that's a very long time to have to deal with the challenges that they face. There's some statistics on the slide that's there. I'm not going to talk through them because some of them have been referenced already, but they're there to highlight the impact that menstruation and menopause have on employees in the workplace. And it's not just the physical impact, it's more often than not the psychological impact of that, and the impact it has on their mental health and well-being. And as Helen said earlier, it's imperative that we don't lose these skilled workers, and we can try and retain talent in our businesses. So in answer to the question as to why, that would be it. Can I have the next slide, please? So what's the legal framework? I'll start with menstruation first, and the short answer is none at the moment. There's currently no specific legal rights under UK employment law for paid leave to those who suffer from severe menstrual pain or any other health related issues to do with their periods. And so an employee is expected to use sick leave or holidays if they're struggling with that, which can amount to quite a lot of days if you think about the fact that this occurs every month for most individuals. And the issue with that is also that statutory sick pay, which in many industries, in SMEs in particular, and sort of lower skilled workforces, SSP will be applicable, and it's only paid after 4 consecutive days of absence. So short periods of absence where there's one or 2 days during each month where an individual has to be off sick, it can result in financial hardship, the risk of getting formal warnings from their employers, and or even worse, that they turn up to work trying to do the best they can, but they're not very productive, make mistakes, things like that can happen. The question of whether menstruation can amount to a disability for the purposes of the Equality Act 2010 hasn't yet been considered by the tribunals. But given the way that the menopause case law is developing, which I'm going to come on to shortly, it's possible that we may see more cases that are kind of a bit broader than menopause and looking more at menstruation, some of the particular symptoms that may present, and the unfortunate reality is that a lot of these cases don't make it to a final hearing and often are settled out of court for many reasons, but mainly because, again, the stigma around it, women feeling that they can't speak up, you know, and a public judgment is published online, so that can put off many claimants, and they'll often take a low settlement for that reason. The only legal framework that we're currently aware exists is in Scotland, which is the Scottish Period Products Act 2022, and that creates a legal right to access free products. And what's great about that, in particular by local authorities and education providers, is that it recognises that having period products available isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, and it should be available to everybody. And it's a very low cost measure for employers to consider offering in their workplaces, making free period products available to their staff. And as Helen just said, sometimes you know, employees may not be aware, and they're not given a warning of something that's about to happen, and it's often too late. And there's many of us who will have experienced having to rush out at lunchtime to the shops trying to get period products, and so having that just accessible and normal everywhere you go is a start. Next slide, please. In regard to menopause, the government confirmed earlier this year that it doesn't intend to make menopause-related specific changes to the Equality Act 2010, which is, 2010, it's a 13-year-old piece of legislation that hasn't necessarily developed with the times as they currently are. And it was confirmed that menopause won't be made a protected characteristic. So as it currently stands, employees are still relying on existing protected characteristics, of which there's 9, but in particular age, sex and disability, and in some cases perhaps gender reassignment, are the ones that are most commonly seen in the case law as it stands. However, as Helen and the Minister touched on before, there is obviously some positive and really exciting work that the government has been doing to push the support around menstrual health and menopause, and encouraging allyship and employers to kind of get on board and take matters into their hands without it having to be made a legal obligation. Bringing claims under the Equality Act is unfortunately very complex, and time-consuming and very expensive to both bring, but more so to defend. And it's much more costly for businesses than it would be if they were to put into place genuine support and measures and some of the things that little adjustments to the workplace. That would be far more cost effective than having to defend a claim in tribunal, not least because of the reputational damage and the morale and all the other impacts that can have on a business. It's also important to remember that the Equality Act claims brought for discrimination don't require minimum service, so employees have got the right not to be discriminated from day one of their employment, and the level of compensation is uncapped. And not only during their employment, I should probably add, but discrimination in the Equality Act also applies during the recruitment processes as well. And so that's another reason for employers to get on board and genuinely embrace and support menopause in the workplace. In any event, there's always health and safety legislation and a duty of care to carry out risk assessments and make sure that somebody who is suffering with symptoms is safe at work. Next slide, please. There's quite a lot of cases around menopause that have developed over the years, with the first of these cases, I believe, dating back to 2012, so over 11 years ago, and things have moved on quite a lot since then. That was a sex discrimination claim, and there's not enough time for me to go through all of the examples that are on the slide today. There's a couple of headline points if you're interested in some of the cases, but there was one case in particular that I wanted to talk about today, and you may have seen it reported because it has been widely reported across multiple publications, but it's the case of Rooney and Leicester City Council. And in that case, the Employment Appeal Tribunal has recently held that the Employment Tribunal wrongly decided that Ms Rooney wasn't disabled, and it's set a legal precedent now for cases relating to menopause and disability moving forward. And the reason for that is that because Employment Tribunal decisions alone are only persuasive, they're not binding. Decisions made by the Employment Appeal Tribunal it's a superior court, so it sets a precedent for all employment tribunals across the UK, including Scotland. There are other higher courts, but the cases haven't gotten there just yet. So very briefly, in the case of Rooney and Leicester City Council, the claimant was a social worker who was forced to resign from her employment because of the way that the council had managed her sickness absences. And she had been given a formal warning in regard to her absences, despite the council being aware that she was suffering with severe symptoms of menopause, which included insomnia, fatigue, stress, depression, memory loss, migraines, and the list goes on. Examples given of how that kind of impacted her day-to-day activities were things like forgetting to attend events and meetings, losing things, forgetting keys, leaving her car unlocked, leaving the hob on, struggling to get out of bed. Interestingly, when she appealed the formal warning, it was heard in the presence of 4 men and was unsuccessful. And she was also refused a female occupational health therapist, despite saying she felt uncomfortable discussing it with a male therapist. Ms Rooney also said she received unfavourable treatment by way of comments, and in particular she had made a comment about hot flushes and was met with a male colleague saying, well, I also get hot in the office. These issues led to her resignation in October 2018, and you can see 5 years on, this is still rumbling along. She brought claims for constructive unfair dismissal, sex discrimination and disability discrimination. The Employment Tribunal struck out her claim for disability, saying that the day-to-day impact was fairly trivial, and that she was a carer for her mum and her husband, so they didn't feel that the symptoms she had put forward were enough, and they said her sex discrimination claim didn't really have any prospect of success. But thankfully, the Employment Appeal Tribunal saw sense and have overturned that decision and said that was wrong. And since then, the new Employment Tribunal, who has heard a 16-day, I believe it was 16 days that started earlier this month, so they're probably in deliberations now, and the judgment should be, well, judgments can take quite some time to come down, so watch this space. But they referred it back to a tribunal to rehear it, to consider the allegations of sex discrimination, and it was held by the tribunal at a preliminary hearing last year that it was a disability. So the case law, as you can see, is developing very fast. There are less cases, I suppose, settling, more people feeling empowered to bring those claims. So from a business perspective, a slightly higher risk than there perhaps was a few years ago in terms of claims. And so again, why it's so important to get it right. Next slide, please. So in terms of kind of practical tips for employers and examples of adjustments, we've talked and touched on some of these already. Helen and the Minister have helpfully touched on those. Allyship, for example, cultural shifts especially. ACAS have issued guidance on menopause at work, so I'd encourage HR teams to, or managers even, to be alive to that guidance and to review that. That brings me to training. Training is imperative for managers and staff. Menopause policies, menopause champions, and having a genuine, inclusive and open environment, not just an EDI tick box, but genuinely embracing inclusivity. And types of reasonable adjustments, I've listed some examples there on the slide, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to go through them all, but some of these are extremely cost effective, and if at all at any cost. For example, allowing people to take breaks, giving them a desk that's perhaps closer to the restrooms, putting making fans available, more temperature control of offices, and also avoiding these kind of comments that we still see today, comparisons of well, when I experienced it, it wasn't like that, or when my partner experienced it, that didn't happen to them. Those sorts of things. Adjusting sickness absence triggers and performance management triggers especially. Most of the case law involve either sickness absence, performance, being pulled up and trying to performance manage someone who's actually in the background really struggling and may not have noticed themselves at that stage that it's because they might be perimenopausal. Next slide, please. So that's it from me. I'll hand back over to Anne, and I hope I did stick to time there. But thank you for having me.
Tricia, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Loads of interesting, so many things we could ask questions about. So I encourage people to put their questions in the Q&A part so that we can get those questions out in the session at the end. So Helen mentioned sort of challenges of SMEs and organisations that maybe don't have a lot of resources. So moving on to our next speaker is Emma Persson, who's founder and director of Lima Health, and working with the menopause and a qualified nurse and workplace health and wellbeing professional. You also received the title of Queen's Nurse from the Queen's Nursing Institute in 2022, which is a fabulous award, and thank you very much for all you've done. I'm going to hand over straight over to you so that you can speak about what you need to cover.
Thank you. Thank you to the previous speakers. I reiterate everything they've just said, and hopefully I can build on it a little bit more. I won't tell you much more about me because it'll become more apparent as I go through the slides. That's better. Okay, so I am a qualified nurse and an occupational health and wellbeing professional, and I have worked in occupational health since Florence Nightingale was around, I think, and I was also a forensic nurse practitioner, so I used to work in police custody with and because doing assessments like fit for interview, I wasn't scared of mental health. It was part of the everyday work, and I was more interested really in the type of role that we all faced it being in the police and then having to go back and do your school run or having to go back and do your normal life, and the impact of the mental health on the police staff. So that was a natural segue into occupational health. And because I wasn't fazed by mental health, I naturally became a stress expert, if you like, and I wrote the policy for the trust, and I rolled out the management training on prevention and management of stress in the workplace using the health and safety executives management standards. And it was a case years ago where I had a senior executive, she was female, forward facing as well as clinical, and she was married and her husband was a medic, and she had 2 young children, and she also had elder care with her mum. And she, quite rightly, NHS, it was a huge role she was having. She developed symptoms of work-related stress and she had some time off, so hence she came on to me for occupational health, and she was compliant with everything that the GP manager and myself were saying, and she wasn't getting any better. And the proactive GP said, I think you're perimenopausal. She was 42, she was. I'd never heard that term, ever. And she hadn't. And she voiced it and said, I'm not that old and I'm still thinking of having another child. And she was changed from the pathway of stress reaction, which is work-related stress, to managing perimenopausal symptoms. And her life changed overnight. And a light bulb went off in my head. Oh, how many women have we performance managed, have left their role, have not gone for promotion, have reduced their responsibilities, have gone part-time due to stress and anxiety and depression, quite real symptoms, when actually some of it could have been hormone related. And to cut a long story short, I ended up training with the British Menopause Society, the Specialist Skills Certificate and the Cognitive Behaviour Therapy Certificate for women suffering from breast cancer survivors returning back to work. And I consequently now train occupational health professionals, other healthcare professionals on think menopause and what to look out for. So, in regards to the workplace, this is not a woman's health issue at all. As everybody has just said, going forward, it is not a woman's health, it's an everybody's issue. And it's because there's never been a time like this, ever. We've got more women in the workplace than ever before. We're all living longer, but unfortunately, women live longer with more disability. We're living more in a frail health, ill health. And we're having to work, we can't retire, the retirement age increases. We want to work, we have years and years of experience, or we may not want to work and we can't retire. We may have elder care and we may have childcare because children can't move out because of the economic situation. So this has never happened before. And the workplace has developed along, and what became apparent in 2017, there was a big report by the government and it identified that menopause can make the workplace worse and the workplace can make menopause worse. And when that relationship was identified, it became a Health and Safety at Work Act issue, because everybody is entitled to a fair and equal process in the workplace. The management regs came in because if there is a hazard or an issue or a risk in the workplace, it needs to be identified and managed to reduce that level of harm. So it didn't become just a woman's health issue, it actually became a workplace issue. And in regard to what the minister was saying, women midlife were falling out of the workplace. An identification of social mobility, how you can measure a person's level of social mobility, is what the job of their parents have when you are in year 10. So roughly when you're in year 10, your mum might be midlife. So if she's falling out or reducing her work, it may have a knock-on impact for the generation coming up. Equally so, forget about biology, psychologically and culturally, how we look at menopause is what all these subjects came together for us to then develop this framework, this guidance. And it was a year in making it. It was a very good process because it wasn't just your regular health and safety HR professionals. Everyone was included. There was academia. There was, more importantly, lived experience. Intersectionality was brought into it because we recognise that if intersectionality identifies other factors that can increase or decrease your opportunities. So where you live, the colour of your skin, your ability, your socioeconomic status. When you add those layers in, not everybody has an equal experience. So we had to incorporate everything. And one of the first things we did was, there's a difference between sex and gender. So biological sex considerations of periods and symptoms and the conditions that come with that, and the gender roles that come with being a female. So then that incorporated trans men, trans women, intersex and non-binary, because everybody is impacted by our sex and cultural aspects to our health. So as you can see, it was a bit complicated. However, I want to try and make this as simple as possible for you all, because for workplaces and SMEs that may not have a dedicated professional, that may not have departments, they may not have an employees assistance program or an occupational health, this can seem quite overwhelming. And especially when you hear that, the cases that have gone forward, how bad it can be for some people. Where do you start? Now, you're not alone. Like I said, that there's never been a time like this for healthcare professionals as well. Healthcare professionals have traditionally never been taught about menopause. Women ourselves, we've never been educated. So we have our sex education talk at school. We might get another one on how not to get pregnant, and that's it. If you have a baby, you might have some antenatal classes more along the lines of how to look after a baby. So it's like our sexual education stops at 16. And like puberty, we didn't go to bed one night a child and get up the next day a fully grown adult. We all recognise a period of time, a transition, where hormones fluctuate up and down, and there's a myriad of experiences. Some people have no issues with puberty, some people have horrendous time. So menopause transition, the perimenopausal time, roughly around about 38, when it starts to fluctuate your hormones, right the way through into your mid-50s. Some people will have no issues and some people need support. When I was talking about mental health 10 years ago, it's the same thing. We all have mental health. You didn't bring your mental health to work. Managers had no duty of care to manage your mental health. And look how far we've come. So this standard is the beginning and the first of its kind to address the inequalities in the workplace, the same as mental health. So we've got new health and work and risk health profiles that we're looking at that we've never looked at before. The shifting workplace dynamics, increasing diversity, the gig economy and AI, all those affect women and trans men and trans women, intersex, non-binary, all of the intersectional factors I talk about, they all affect them disproportionately. If you look into AI, the increase of AI, the jobs that are more likely to be cut are in a female-dominated sector. The gig economy, where you can, yes, you've got independence to work alone, but then you don't have access to all the things that we're talking about today if you're with an employer, and their diversity in the workforce. So all of this coming together, the hidden suffering, we're talking about the taboo, the care responsibility the female gender role has, the stereotype that we're more caring has led to 7 out of 10 carers in Europe being female, and our longer working lives. And it's the longer working lives that affects everyone. So no one sails through the menopause or the menopause transition. Nobody does. 1 in 2 women will have a fracture. Cardiovascular disease or heart disease is the biggest killer of women. And 1 in 3 women will have stress incontinence, leading to an admission to a nursing home. Not 1 in 3 women will be admitted to a nursing home. Stress incontinence is the second cause to be admitted to a nursing home. Now, all those things can impact a woman, so much so that her life is in disability, and they're all preventable. And because we've not spoken about menopause, and because we've not had an education and healthcare professionals not identified it, and managers don't know how to manage it in the workplace, it's just not spoken about, and women will put up and shut up. So if you're an SME, this guidance is the perfect document. It is quite long, and to be honest, we did try and cut it down. And so this guidance is a good way to support you on your journey, because you can start with a framework. Sorry, I was going to talk about the increase in employment tribunals, but Trishna very, very adequately and more eloquently than I did spoke about the risks to business, because even though we're talking about risks to women's health here, actually the operational risks and risk to business and the risk to the economy also needs to be considered, hence me saying it's not a women's health issue. So the big overarching problem is the culture. So the biological, psychological and sociological model that we look at health and work, cultural impacts have rarely been taken into consideration. And when we went through COVID, we saw how much the culture did impact health and well-being. So it was the cultural impacts of what job you did, where you lived, how access to healthcare, and then the intersectional racism that came out through the NHS report and the Public Health England report, that you are more likely to die if you had X, Y, and Z factors in your identity. So we recognise that culture played a big part. And using this tool, this framework, introducing it into your workplace, helps influence the culture into a positive way, because even just having the conversation to say, look, we're going to have a look at this, or let's have a look at this together, or the manager sitting down and read it, already you are influencing culture change. So you're going to develop your best practice to prevent all those cases. And Trishna put up a very good slide earlier about what you can do. Even if you're a small, medium enterprise who don't have those roles, often will say to me, oh, we don't have well-being, we don't have dedicated well-being. But actually, when I go into those organisations, they absolutely do. It's just not under the term of an organisation, a department of well-being. You do care for your staff, you do offer flexibility where, and you do identify when your staff may need some support, but also the well-being of the positive aspects in the workplace. So you absolutely probably already do some of the stuff. You're tackling the taboo straight away. The stigma is the big key. So for example, whenever I talk about menopause in the workplace, I also talk about prostate cancer, because men surviving prostate cancer treatment will come back into the workforce who will also have hot flushes or may have hot flushes. They will also need products in their restroom for incontinence while they're going through treatment. So it isn't just about a menopause transition, it's about being able to talk about the taboo subjects that we don't talk about in the workplace. Education and awareness. In the guidance, there is different sections where the first section is you can identify if you do need to address this, and of course you will, everybody does. And you can go through a framework, this tick box questions, it enables you to highlight what you have already and what you might need to work on. There is sections of questions, how to have the sensitive conversation. There is a section of examples of some interventions that you might be able to do, some adaptations. Now, every single workplace is different, every sector is different. So I can't go into the NHS and say, well, you need to offer flexibility and work from home, because you can't do that. The same as teachers. So every organisation has their own set of unique needs that you can identify. And like we said previously, the small things do count. Equally so, shift workers. So I do training at 6 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon to try and hit those shift workers. But we know that the key person in all of this is the manager. The sign of a good organisation, a healthy organisation, is when the manager knows to either refer to occupational health, refer to HR, or to refer to external agencies if you don't have those departments, like ACAS, like Women's Health Concern. All these external services that are put in one place in the document, in the references at the back. And I don't say a common sense to the workplace. Common sense means it's common. Well, actually, we're always talking about what's outside. It's everybody included. So it's included sense to work. So if you have somebody in your workplace that maybe doesn't have flexibility, they're low in the hierarchy, so they don't have much autonomy, so they can't take a break, they can't just walk out if they have a hot flush. If you know that someone in their home life is, so parent, a child, some pressures increasing, you will know that they may be having a tough time at the moment. And if you normalise menopause, because menopause can happen any time after puberty, it isn't just midlife. Endometriosis, 1 in 10 women will have endometriosis, 8 women, sorry, and it takes an average of 10 years to get diagnosed. But these are all the conditions of when it goes wrong. Sexual and reproductive health is normal. If we spoke about puberty in a way that it was something to be dreaded and something to be horrified at, and pregnancy, then we wouldn't have babies. Menopause in the main is a normal transition. However, there are some women that absolutely do need support, just like mental health. We all have mental health, and in the main, most people manage it, but there are some people that fall off a cliff, and we absolutely do need to support it, and that's our duty of care. So it's knowing when to refer on, and the guidance can help you. So it's, let me just go on to the next slide, sorry. So this is a very, very easy infographic it's in the standard. And already, if you've picked up the standard, you're bringing an inclusive approach to your employees. At the moment, most policies and procedures are gender neutral. They're classed as gender neutral, so that means equality for everybody across the board. But actually, the gender neutral is based on a male body and a male experience. So it doesn't have sex and reproductive health in there. If you think about the 11 cervical smears that a woman must have, or the 5 mammograms that she must have across her life, or the amount of, if she's on contraception, the annual review, nothing like that is catered for in any workplace standard. Sexual and reproductive health is left at home. So you bringing this in, automatically an inclusive approach you're bringing. And the practical solutions, a policy guidance, you don't need to have a policy, however it's best practice if you're a large organisation, but a management guidance is key to support your managers to manage your employees. And in that management guidance, it would be, you would have your processes and what you've got in the organisation already. You will have some management training in there, some education and awareness, and your managers know where to refer on. Okay. Work design, how the workplace is designed to support that person. So in the main, if they can work from home, if they need to, if they're heavy bleeding, or if they can have a fan at the desk, or how they pace their work, or it's a one-to-one with the manager to sit down with that employee and say, right, how can this work? How can we help you? There are templates in the guidance that can help you with that, to have those conversations, and examples of what you can do. The supportive workplace cultures goes without saying. So in the main, most organisations want to support their employees, but don't know where to go about it. Using this guidance and the references in the back to sign on is a good place to start. Role adjustments, that is down to where you are, where you live, how you work. That everyone's work is different. No 2 jobs are the same. So the role adjustments will be what is reasonable within your organisation. And the physical aspects of work, yes, absolutely. For some women, when hormones start to fluctuate, it will alter how their muscles and bones are performing at that time, the fatigue, it will. And so just small adjustments at that time, while they're sorting themselves out and they're getting support, or they're managing it themselves, just a small alteration of tasks will help that person stay in work. And then, of course, always evaluate, always step back, see what works, what doesn't work, and build on from that. So the best practice for you, for organisations, think to yourself now, do you have anybody in your workforce that may be menopausal, so that's any female whatsoever? Do you have a problem with attrition? Do you have a problem with recruitment? Do you want to increase your recruitment? Do you want to maintain your staff? Do you want to increase your talent and let them grow? And if that's the case, then yes, there is a case for action here for what everyone's just said prior to me. Who does what? Whose responsibility is what? So what's the employee's responsibility? What's the manager's responsibility? What's occupational health, health and safety, HR, if you've got them, what responsibility and who does what? In the document, it goes through different roles and who can do what. How do you do it? There is a really
culture in the workforce, how to go about it, how to get influence, how to get buy-in, what will help. There are tools and frameworks in the guidance to help you along your way, and who will benefit. And everyone will benefit by the end of it. But you're not just retaining that person in the workforce, you're helping support a change in your workforce culture. So that's a brief, very brief overview, no in-depth. I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up on mine later on. Thank you. Over to Anne.
Emma, thank you so much. That was a fantastic walkthrough of everything. Really appreciate it. It's now a great opportunity for us to go through some case studies and listen to some experience of actually live organisations where they have put this into practice. I'm delighted to start off with Sharon McCann, who is commissioning editor at Cambridge University Press. So I'm just going to hand straight over to Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. You might be on mute. Are you on mute? Sorry. Can our tech team help Sharon? Sorry.
Thanks. Sorry, the organizer had muted me and I couldn't take it off there. Thanks, Anne, and hello everybody. I'm really pleased to be here presenting to you today. I was asked to do so in my capacity as the founder and one of the current co-chairs of the Menopause Network at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. I don't have any slides to share with you, it's just my talk. And I'll begin by giving you an overview of our network's development, our network's development and activities, followed by some very quick tips on how to get a similar initiative off the ground in your own organisation. So our network started life in autumn 2020 when the penny finally dropped for me and I realised that the increasingly difficult and sometimes puzzling symptoms I've been struggling with over the previous few years were symptoms of perimenopause. And by that time, my symptoms were having an adverse effect on my work life as well as on my home life, and I was really struggling to cope. I looked to see what guidance was available at work that might help me to manage my symptoms while getting back on top of my workload. And while I was fortunate to have a very supportive manager who was a great help to me, I quickly realised that we were both in the dark when it came to navigating this new challenge, and that at that time, there was little or no direct guidance available from the organisation. I was already involved in another staff network which had a strong focus on women, and having learned about the Menopause Cafe movement, I used my position on that network's committee to set up a Menopause Cafe within our organisation. I was sure that if I was struggling with menopause symptoms at work, others were bound to be struggling too. I just never heard anyone mention it. So I felt uncomfortable doing so at first. Starting a conversation about menopause within that forum opened the door to new connections in different parts of the business, and I was soon put in touch with a like-minded colleague in another department who came on board as my first recruit for the proposed Menopause Cafe. And through her, I learned of some draft menopause guidance for managers that have been awaiting sign-off for some time due to the impact of COVID and lockdown. So we then worked to ensure that the guidance was signed off in time for World Menopause Day 2020. Over the course of the next few months, I recruited 3 more hosts and we finally launched an online menopause cafe in June 2021. And we've been hosting a session a month ever since. Our first World Menopause Day event followed soon afterwards in October 2021, featuring a talk by local menopause expert Pat Duckworth. And by that stage, that was October 2 years ago, it was clear that a menopause cafe wasn't enough and that there was demand for a dedicated menopause network within the organisation. So we rebranded and relaunched in spring 2021 as a fully fledged staff network under the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging umbrella. At this time, the company's grassroots staff networks were becoming more formalised under the guidance of the EDIB team, and this development has been to our network's advantage. Like all of the other staff networks in our organisation, we now have a committee in place. We have the benefit of protected time each week for network activities, though I have to say it's still sometimes difficult to carve the time out. We have a generous annual budget, which we use for events and other endeavours, and we're also able to draw on the support and expertise of an executive sponsor, as well as an associate sponsor, both of whom are available to offer advice and guidance and to support us in achieving our mission. And in a nutshell, our mission is to represent the interests of everyone in our organisation who's affected by menopause, either directly or indirectly. And we achieve this through our activities, which include hosting our coffee sessions on a monthly basis, as well as hosting regular speaker events, often in collaboration with other staff networks. In addition, we campaign for policy changes to improve working conditions for menopausal women throughout the organisation. We feel fortunate to work for a company like Cambridge University Press and Assessment, which gives us the time and resources to do this work, and we're not alone in doing it. Others in the business have been working to implement change on this front too, including colleagues in other staff networks and in the wellbeing and people teams. And as a result of our combined efforts, it's been possible for a couple of years in our workplace to select menstrual symptoms and menopause symptoms as a reason for absence from work when logging an absence in workday. And more recently, free, environmentally friendly sanitary products have been available in staff toilets throughout the UK. Desk fans and neck fans are available to menopausal colleagues on request, and wellbeing passports for menopause are available to staff who need reasonable adjustments over the longer term to accommodate their symptoms. In respect to our network's educational and social activities, the highlight of our year is obviously World Menopause Day on 18 October and Menopause Awareness Month. And for the last couple of years, we've hosted a programme of events throughout October. This year, we worked with other staff networks to host a very informative talk by Emma Thomas of Managing the Menopause, as well as a workshop by the Bedfordshire Centre for Therapeutic Studies on taking a resilience-informed approach to menopause, and also a book club session that's happening this afternoon, where the book up for discussion is Sharon Blackie's Haggitude, Reimagining the Second Half of Life. On behalf of our own network, we organised a talk on nutrition by Amanda Ryder, which took place last week, and we were also privileged to hold a talk by the chair of the British Menopause Society, Dr. Paula Briggs, a couple of weeks ago. Food and nutrition has been a strong focus for us since our inception. We're very lucky to be part of a large organisation that has excellent catering facilities in our Cambridge-based sites, and the company's head chef is extremely supportive of our network and provides only menopause-friendly menus across our Cambridge staff restaurants on World Menopause Day. And he also provides the recipes to share on our website for non-Cambridge-based colleagues. Another initiative the catering team support us with is a voucher scheme, whereby network members can cash in a network voucher each month and receive a hot or cold drink or a snack in return. And the only rule is that they must meet up with one or more members of the network in order to redeem the voucher. It's early days for this scheme, but we hope that it'll help to bring our members together in person more often. Another staple in our events calendar is the company's International Women's Day programme in March. And this year, the Menopause Network hosted the second highest attended talk in the programme, which was delivered by speaker Lou Perham on the topic of menstruality and cyclical living, a subject that's clearly central to this session today. And another important focus for us is mental health and menopause. And last year, we reached out to the local branch of mental health charity Mind, and we worked with them to help to create 2 training courses on menopause and mental health, one aimed specifically at line managers and the other at a general workplace audience. From our inception in late 2020 to our rebrand as a network in 2022, our membership grew from 1 to 5 to roughly 150 members, and I'm very pleased to say that we now have over 300 members around the world. And increased numbers mean greater diversity and a corresponding need to widen our provision. And in 2022, we started a dedicated early and premature menopause coffee session, which also takes place monthly. And this year, we established a separate but integrated Latin American branch. And we've also extended our support to colleagues in our UK warehouses. We hope to establish branches in other regional and global workplaces over the coming months and years, and we're mindful of the need to ensure that any such branches are managed locally and are free to develop according to their specific needs. In terms of the larger integrated network, our main aims for the year ahead are to work with an external provider to train menopause ambassadors both in the UK and in our global offices, so that we can better support colleagues and offer reliable training to line managers. Our other primary aim is to review and revise the menopause guidelines mentioned previously to ensure that they're up to date and meet the needs of colleagues across the business. And we believe that policy and training are key to ensuring that a consistent level of support is available to all colleagues, whether they're experiencing menopause themselves or supporting a friend, spouse, loved one, colleague, line report, or indeed a manager through menopause. And I'm conscious of the fact that my experience and the examples I've given are indicative of what can be achieved in larger organisations, and that they might not transfer easily to smaller businesses. Irrespective of the size of your business, the main message I'd like to get across today is that the purpose of our network is and always has been to connect people. Our coffee sessions are the cornerstones of what we do, and everything else is a bonus. I think we all owe a great deal to initiatives like the Menopause Cafe movement. And if all you can do, initially at least in your organisation, is to bring people together over a real or virtual beverage, it will make a significant contribution to challenging the culture in your place of work and to creating a sense of inclusion and belonging for colleagues who might otherwise feel overlooked, sidelined and demotivated as a result. You'd be surprised how much of an impact even very small changes can have, and how much influence you can have just by starting that conversation. For anyone looking to do something similar in their own workplace, here are a few tips. Number one is don't wait for someone else to do it. Just jump in, do it yourself. 2, don't go it alone. Rope in everyone and anyone you can. Knock on the doors of any and all teams that might be relevant, from HR to health and safety to well-being, and make good use of existing networks within your business. 3, recruit a team that's genuinely committed to your cause and to bringing about real change in the workplace. These are the people who pull out all the stops when you need them to, and who share your drive and commitment. 4, allow yourself to delegate and let go. And I have to say, I struggle with this one. Delegating isn't easy when you've built up an initiative from scratch, but it's absolutely necessary. 5, start small, but be ambitious. You'll never achieve everything all at once, so take your time and prioritize accordingly. And finally, 6, don't worry about being out of your depth, because that's exactly where you need to be. And I know I'm almost out of time, but before I finish, I really want to mention the great team we have in our network. They're the people who pull out all the stops, including our 2 co-chairs who joined me this year, Lisa Winnington and Lorena Camargo Vega, our events officer, Rachel Briggs, global officers, Susan Lawrence and Lisa Sadler, our additional coffee hosts, Helen Turner, Lucinda Toomey and Rachel Bateman, our warehouse workplace rep, Karen Hamilton, and our campaigns officer, Joe Turnbull. They've all worked hard to help develop our network over the last few years, and they share the credit. And that's it from me, and thank you for listening. Back to you, Anne.
Sharon, thank you so much. That was brilliant, and I think you win the prize for the quote of the day, which is "Don't wait for someone else to do it." I think that's absolutely true in this particular subject. I'm now delighted to hand over to Rebecca Davis. Becky has worked for Punch Pubs as a field-based operations manager for 9 years and is currently acting as Women's Wellbeing Champion and is a qualified menopause champion. So without further ado, Becky, I'm going to hand straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you very much for all at the BSI for inviting me to this brilliant event. It's so important at the minute and so very relevant, so thank you. So when we first started this journey, we set up a group of people called Push the Pineapple, where it was really an umbrella group, and we looked at various different aspects of supporting our employees through different initiatives. And I'm happy to say that the Women's Wellbeing Champion was one of the catalysts for this group of people. Very similar to the previous speaker, when I first started the journey in the menopause, it was very much a personal experience for me, and I found that the resources outside of the workplace were quite lacking, and so automatically looked within the workplace to see what resources were available, and a bit like the previous speaker, found that they were a little bit lacking. Fortunately for me, I was really lucky to have a very supportive HR team who jumped on board very, very quickly and help us set up the Push the Pineapple group of people, which focus on a series of different spaces, such as men's wellbeing, women's wellbeing and physical wellbeing. But my journey really started with, I started doing a lot of research around the menopause when I realised that that's what was the cause of my depression, anxiety, feeling not like myself. And one of the websites that I came across was a great website called Rock My Menopause. And they described people as menovists, so real allyship with women going through the menopause as well as those people going through the menopause. So we kind of stole their hashtag a little bit and and called ourselves Menovists. I developed a group of working people which really came on board and helped me promote this area. And it really started with me telling my story. We have a company communications network on a Tuesday which goes out to the full business. And I sat and told my story about how my journey with the menopause had affected me and within the workplace. And that really helped starting the conversation. And if I could give one tip to anybody out there, it's when you can draw on lived experience within the workplace, it really helps to get the message home. That certainly was the case for me. Following the communication on our company internal huddle, the feedback I got was incredible. And what really surprised me and astonished me was how many men had reached out to me, whether that be in a line manager capacity or whether that be the partner of somebody that was going through the menopause. And it really helped start the conversation and normalise the conversation around menopause. So we then held our first national menopause day, where we did a yoga session with a trained menopause yoga specialist. We did some healthy eating with our own in-house academy chefs, and we also combined with Talking Menopause, who delivered an excellent webinar for us, which really helped continue the conversation. Following that, we looked at what our existing resources were, which weren't very many at the time. Implemented our first ever menopause policy, and the company kindly budgeted it for me to do menopause champion training, and I also did the ACAS free menopause champion training, which was really helpful in developing what we were going to do going forwards. This is just a few pictures of what we did on our first Menovist event, and we committed that this would become an annual event, but that we would always do it outside World Menopause Month, so as not to detract from all the events externally that go on around that month. So it was a conscious decision to do it in November so that we could really focus on our own event. And I'm delighted to say that we're running our second Menovist event next week, where we have invited external people this time round within the hospitality industry. So what we've done since is all of our employees have access to awareness raising material around menopause, which sits on our internal intranet. Within our head office, we have enclosed toilets and shower facilities and a quiet room to help those cope with menopause and menstrual health. We ran a webinar, which I've already mentioned. We really are trying to change our culture to make sure we are an inclusive environment where people feel much more comfortable talking about the menopause. And certainly the feedback I've had since the journey started 3 years ago, it is really, really different to where we were when we started. So it feels like people are much more comfortable now talking about menopause, and we've removed some of the taboo. And having seen the implementation of the BSI standards, we're now really working towards making sure that our menstrual health policies are as up to date as our menopause policies are. So what we're looking to do in the future is we are committed to doing an annual review of our menopause policy. We have, in a couple of weeks' time, we have the fabulous Helen that's delivering our line manager training for us. We are also in talks with an external organisation called Bloody Good Employer to look at how we can support our colleagues with their menstrual health. We're reviewing all of our policy documents to make sure that they're all aligned. Next week is our second Menovist event. We have quite a lot of external visitors to our head office, so we really need to improve our communication to ensure that all of our guests and our field teams are aware of the facilities available when visiting the head office. We're working alongside our recruitment team to make sure that all the practices that they are conducting when recruiting, not just internal employees, but also people in our pub network, are very inclusive in menopause and menstrual health. And we're hoping to get the menstrual health to the same levels of awareness and resources as menopause. And the last thing that we are really doing is, there's been a lot of talk today about how difficult it is for SMEs. And as a pub operating company, the majority of our pubs are operated by individual business owners. So our next phase of our journey is really how we can help with resources and education to making sure that our pubs are supported within this space. And that's pretty much it. Happy to take any questions, and back to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Becky. Great experience and great stories and great photos. So thank you very much for joining us and contributing. Our last case study and our last speaker before we go to the Q&A session, I'm very happy to welcome Abby Lashabikan. I'm sorry, Abby, I just did that wrong. I apologise. But really looking forward to hearing what you're going to talk about from the Welsh Parliament. I think you will need to turn on your camera and microphone, hopefully. Brilliant. Thanks, Abby. Good to see you.
I forgot the microphone, didn't I? It always happens. Thank you, Anne. I'm really excited about the journey we've done and been through in the Senedd, and I'm really glad to be invited here to get a chance to talk about that journey and about how the BSI supported that journey. So next slide. Yeah. I work for the Welsh Parliament, which is the democratically elected body that represents the interests of Wales and its people. It's commonly known as the Senedd, and it makes laws for Wales, agrees Welsh taxes, and holds the Welsh Government to account. And the Senedd Commission is the body that provides the property, staff, and resources to support the Senedd. Our organisation is a small to medium-sized organisation with no more than 500 staff. So basically the why, sorry, the slides are going really quickly. So if they just could slow down. So yeah. So why is the Senedd addressing menstruation, menstrual health and perimenopause? And the why is quite simply, next slide, the raised societal awareness around the menopause, the growing importance that people are placing on well-being at work, and the fact that is, if we want to be considered as an employer of choice and attract and retain the most talented and skilled employees, then why wouldn't we? We can't afford not to. Next slide. So we're not starting our journey from scratch, and many of us are all going to be starting our journey from a different place. Okay, so I think I better take over back control because it's going too quickly. Is that okay if I take control back? Okay. So
you've got control.
Thank you. So we're not starting from scratch. We've and many organisations have to find their own place where they're started. So I'm going to be referring to our journey, which was where we've developed a menopause guidance in July 2020. We provide sanitary products free of charge across the estate. We have flexible working. We consider natural fibre uniform. So we're not, we're quite a far along in our journey. So the next step that we needed to do was consider our initial steps. Sorry, I'm just trying to, sorry, I can't seem to move the slides. Okay, yes, we're on track. So we're considering our current policy and comparing it to the British standards and identifying what we were already doing and where the gaps that we could do for taking control. Sorry, taking control. I'm just thinking of how to take control back of the slides. Where there were gaps and then where our organisation could make improvements. And we did this in cooperation with the workforce, included different teams and ensured representation from a range of employees in different roles, including people that represented the demographics of all our whole organisation. And then we also looked at policies and procedures already in place and cross-checked those with what we're already being provided support-wise for our employees. So we're looking at sickness and absence, performance management. It looked at risk assessments that we've been carried out. So once we'd identified what we were doing, where the gaps are, next slide, we just broke them into quick wins, medium-term actions, long-term actions. And then the next slide, the quick wins included, but weren't limited to, reviewing and updating the existing policies. So we looked at the terminology, ensuring it was up to date, because I'm sure anyone who works in an organisation in HR is well aware of how often terminology moves on. So we wanted to make sure it was up to date, existed. We added in the legal duty. We wanted to cover the whole perimenopausal health cycle, and we wanted it more than anything to provide practical advice and tools. Next slide. Our midterm, next slide. Our midterm actions looked at, so we intend to review the policy again in a year or two, make sure that it's still up to date, there's not been any movement legal wise or in best practice. We also explore things like the menopause accreditation and the new signing up to things that, like the minister earlier mentioned. And then we'll also consider the implementation of inclusion workplace adjustment passports. Next slide. And then, yeah, the longer term actions are going to be things that sort of outside our control, to be honest, either because they're illegal, so they'll take a little bit more long term to implement or change. They might be things like our procurement requirements and specifications will need, but our certain contracts already in place aren't coming to an end for a longer period of time. And then there's our recruitment orientation practices. These will take time to embed and to define. And then there's our training provision, and we want our procurement requirements, our recruitment practices, our training provisions to be inclusive of menopause. So it's going to be involved with working with all those people to ensure that that happens. Next slide. So how has the BSI standard supported the organisation? And next slide. It's done this by providing and bringing the topic into focus and facilitated conversations in the workplace around perimenopause and menopause. It's provided a framework to take to our organisation's leaders to explain the requirement for change and provide evidential basis for business case to move ahead with our initiative to build a more inclusive, culturally aware organisation. And it's enabled us to upskill, empower and support our staff by providing practical tools. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is highlight some of the people and from our organisation explaining how they found the tool very helpful. So Karen, who's chair of our Mindful Network, says the toolkit is making it easier for women who are pretty good at understanding their body to seek help, and it's ensuring that there's support, understanding and flexibility for those having irregular and often unpredictable symptoms. Next slide. Then there's Ross Davis, inclusion manager. He says that he sees the need for increased awareness and workplace policies. He says there is clearly a need for more men to have an increased understanding that they can apply both inside and outside the workplace. This is because, as my colleagues who've gone before me have touched on, it's not just a woman's issue. This is an issue for men in the workplace, with the colleagues they work with and line manage, and in the home with their family going through the menopause. Next slide. So Holly, the head of the diversity, inclusion and recruitment team, has said the new BSI standard is a game changer for her, both as a manager and as a colleague. Using the new standard has strengthened our existing guidance in the organisation, and by using the guidance, it offers workplace the opportunity to make positive changes to furthering inclusion and to designing a roadmap for the longer term. Next slide. So quite simply, it's been a wide-reaching tool that's basically done a lot of the work for us, because it's basically sorry, I've lost my place. Yeah, it's all-encompassing and a handy tool for people in our organisation to upskill themselves on the topic of menopausal health. It's in the guidance, it's all there, and research is from a widely diverse group and a large group of people that we would never have been able to get that standard of research unless we've done it. So quite simply, the standard for me is all-encompassing and a handy tool, and I'll be happy to take questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to hand back to Anne now. Sorry about that.
So much, Abby, thank you so much. That was great. And I really appreciate all the time and effort all the speakers have put into preparing for today and to speaking. I'm going to ask all the panels to come back on camera now, because we've got some questions that have come in, and so I will be putting those to you. My first one was for the Minister, so I hope she's still here. I'm just checking the cameras as they come on. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Ah, brilliant. Minister, we've had a couple of people ask what you think, what you believe the government's timeline for policy implementation in the workplace would be around this topic.
Well, I think the time is now. We've got a lot of best practice there now out on the Help to Grow website with what Helen's done. The next stage of this is sector work and the other stuff that she outlined. I think the key bit then is disseminating that down into smaller businesses and supporting that way. But for me, unless you're going to put this on some kind of formal statute, which other parties and others have done in terms of formalising reporting and standards, which I'm not a great fan of, if I'll be really honest, because I think for me, the more we're doing this and bringing people on the journey and not making it another reason not to think about employing and supporting women because it becomes more difficult, is the challenge here. And I was very mindful of Trishna's point around the legalities and other things. So, you know, once you start to make things really complicated and more difficult, instead of this really great organic growth, which isn't going to be perfect, but is working, then the danger is, and I see this with people talking about doing different types of recruitment, being more bold in what they do, whether it's prison leavers or care leavers. Once they get over worried about reporting and doing it, quotes, properly, then people tend to regress. So I hope that isn't me sounding wishy-washy. I want to build on what we've got rather than make it too difficult. The other thing is, I don't want, once people know how to do things well, they'll tend to put it into a funnel and be brave about doing more. But if you give a whole big list of shopping lists of what employers need to do, then the danger is it puts them back into their traditional ways of doing things. I hope that makes sense, Anne.
Yes, no, it does make sense, and I think it's especially applicable. I think when you talk to SMEs who struggle with the shopping list of things. You mentioned Trishna, and actually I think I just want to pop over to Trishna now to say, sort of ask whether you have any advice for what employees should do if they don't feel they're getting the right support from their employers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it will depend on the circumstances of what support isn't being given. But if employees are able to, then the first port of call would always be, if they're comfortable to and they can be empowered to, is have that conversation with their line manager or HR in the first instance, if there is HR. Conscious that in SMEs, that's not always the case. You know, if that isn't helpful to them, then they might want to consider going down some more formal channels, which would be raising a formal grievance or making some sort of specific request for reasonable adjustments or a flexible working request, and putting some, which will put some onus on the business and the employer to formally address the points and support that's required. You know, ideally we would like to get to a point where that's not necessary and that these conversations can be quite fluid, because things will change, the support that's required will change over time, it won't necessarily be permanent. So ideally there should be able to be productive conversations that are ongoing and kept under review. And of course, the last resort, if that's not helpful, is to consider claims they might have. Now, discrimination claims can actually be brought whilst an individual is still employed. So if they want to remain in employment and they don't necessarily want to leave, but they have got strong grounds for discrimination claim, they might consider bringing that whilst they're still there. It's obviously very tricky in practice because relationships can break down, but it depends on the circumstances again, because in some cases that's not always how it happens, and genuine resolutions can be sought from that. And the reason I say that they might want to consider that is because of the very tight timelines for bringing claims, which is 3 months less 1 day from the act of discrimination, which might often be a chain of events. So depends on when the last act is. And it does also give rise to further protection for the individual, because if they intimate that they might have a claim or they bring a claim, they're then protected from detriment under the Equality Act, so they shouldn't suffer victimisation. I'd obviously stress getting legal advice as early as you can, but if you can, have productive and informal conversations with your employer, whether that be line manager, reaching out to menopause champions, even mental health first aiders in the first instance, and trying to seek that support, then that would be the first kind of protocol, I think.
It's really interesting about having the environment where people feel they can actually have those informal conversations, which kind of leads me on to another question that we've had, which I was going to fire at Becky, and I hope that's okay, Becky. But one of the questions that we'd thought about beforehand was sort of in a very male-dominated workplace, you know, how do people handle it and what should you do about that? But we've actually had a sort of extension on that, which is whether, you know, if you work in a very male dominated place, do you think that sort of attending sessions and training should be mandatory or voluntary, or how would you go about that?
I think one of the things that I was most surprised about when I started the conversation around the menopause was the amount of men that reached out to me, that fed back to me how great it was that we'd started this conversation. And I think that once you start, the most important thing is starting the conversation. I think naturally will follow on from that, because you will have several men within the organisation that may well be going through the menopause with a partner that can quite quickly become allies within that space. And I think it's really important to gather those allies very, very quickly and at the start. And the feedback that I had from a lot of men within our organisation was just thank you for highlighting this. We were scared to bring it up. We were scared, you know, we were struggling, whether that be from a line manager perspective or whether that be from their own personal experiences at home with a partner. One guy actually said to me, you know, straight after the session that I'd done on our internal communications, he went home and had that conversation with his partner about what she was going through. So it's the starting point for me is starting the conversation and normalizing the conversation, and you will bring men along with you when you start to do that, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
great. Thank you very much. Emma, I was going to come to you next, because another question we've had is really around where people are working from home and where their environment could be largely unknown, and sort of how would you recommend that they're supported and through this time?
So it depends on the organisation. So if you have remote workers, this will come under exactly all the other existing HR, health and wellbeing, flexible working, agile working policies. It shouldn't need to stand alone, but of course it does, because it's not included. And if you, again, what Rebecca's just said, if you have open communication straight away, it doesn't matter what you are talking about, what you need to approach your manager about, you're able to do that. So if somebody is having symptoms that are impacting their health, either whether it's physical, whether it's something to do with bleeding or hot flushes or pain, or if it's emotional, if it's psychological, brain fog, across the life course of a woman, not just menopause, whether it's endometriosis, PMDD, all of the things. If you have open communication, you've already normalised it in your workforce, it's already part of the health and wellbeing strategy, it's an inclusive strategy, then it's pretty simple to be able to address that at home. So if they're at home, they can manage symptoms if they're physical, much more easier with heavy bleeding. So we'll all know a woman who's had heavy bleeding, and some of those women will have had it in the workplace at meetings. You know, so if they're at home, they can manage that for 2 or 3 days and then go to the office, and they no sickness absence, they're all in control. However, if they are at home and they perhaps need some emotional and psychological support, that's more of a one-to-one with manager, the same good management standard skills, checking in, knowing your employee, offering to signpost, referral to, if you've got occupational health, that's always missed out of the conversation. You know, if you've got occupational health, referring to occupational health to see if there's anything that can be adapted in the workforce, what can be done. A lot of organisations that we'll all go into don't actually know what they have wellbeing wise. They won't know that there's an EAP or there's a menopause champion, or so it's the regular communication, touching base, one-to-one that you should be doing anyway, that will support anybody with sex and reproductive health issues at home. If there was a specific, you know, to that question, happy to just add that specific in and I'll answer more, because that's a general thing that I've just said.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Emma. There isn't more on that question at the moment. The questioner may come back to us. Helen, there's a couple of questions that really are for you. A couple are about how can people access getting involved in some of the roundtables, and where they can find the no time to step back. But before you do that, in your sort of HR capacity, I was just wondering, somebody's asked what you think is the best way for a line manager to approach a person they think is perimenopausal, if the person hasn't mentioned it or considered it.
Yeah.
Or do you do that?
Really good question, and I was smiling and nodding when Emma was talking about good leadership, best practice in management, etc. And it is about having those open conversations. And I do, you know, often internally and with clients, a whole session around, you know, empathetic listening and opening up the conversation and that type of thing. And I always say this can be overlaid into any topic. When, you know, we're encouraging people to bring their whole self to work, it really doesn't matter what they're presenting with, whether that be that they're perimenopausal, poor mental health, you know, struggling with fertility, whatever it is. The fundamentals of good leadership and good management apply, and it is asking in obviously a safe space, giving them time to talk, etc., but regularly asking them, what else can I do to help you? How can I help you? What would make life better for you now? And that is how you start the conversation. And, you know, through education, line management, process, etc., line manager training. You know, we talk very openly. In this particular instance, we're talking about perimenopause, so we talk about the symptom checker, we talk about the various apps that are available to start and prompt that conversation. But as a line manager, I would say that it is about asking those open conversations. How can I help you? What can I do to make things better? Is there anything I can do to support you?
Thank you very much. And very quickly, do you want to just quickly flag how people could, you know, if they wanted to get involved in the roundtables or
Absolutely. So some people have actually reached out already on LinkedIn in my LinkedIn messages. So if anybody wants to get involved, please, I may regret this, I do keep up to date with them on a weekend, so I will look on Saturday and Sunday. But if anybody wants to reach out to me via LinkedIn, please feel free to do that. We want to hear from employers who are doing really good stuff, and we want to hear from employers who want to learn more. So I'm really happy to do that. And you asked about the No Time to Step Back report. That can be found on the gov.uk website. So if you want to take a look at that, but yeah,
Brilliant.
Really happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about good practice within their organisation.
Thank you, Helen. I'm going to turn to Sharon now, and I'm just interested in a little bit more about what you find the best way to run a menopause support group, and whether you have any hints on how you make and advice on how to make people comfortable in that process. I suppose that comes back to where people maybe haven't actually said they've got an issue. Just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't really just necessarily describe it as a support group, more a sharing group, I suppose. I'm not really sure. We're very clear that our coffee hosts are not experts. We can't advise people on things, so we're not there to support in that capacity, and that we're all kind of, you know, feeling our way through this process together. But in our coffee sessions, we just try ourselves to be as open as we can. I found that when we approach topics like mental health in particular, it's very, very hard to get people to start talking about that. And it's the one topic that people more than anything want to talk about, we find, but it takes a long, long time to get there. So sharing our own experiences, I think, is the first thing to make people comfortable. We also really invite people to come along and just sit in the background. Nobody has to contribute, nobody has to take part. I keep an eye on our when people join our Yammer group, and I quietly add them into our coffee chat, so they just get to observe the kind of chat that goes on in the background without feeling that they're necessarily involved, that there's any expectation from them, and they see what kind of information is shared in the discussions that we have, and then gradually people get more and more involved. A lot of people also contact myself by email, or or other committee members, and we'll have a chat separately, and we're always happy to meet up with people as well and do that, and that can also help people to get involved.
Great.
And just being as keeping, advertising our events as much as possible, being warm and open and inviting, collaborating with other networks as well. A lot of people get involved and come to us through our collaborations. They hear about us and they feel better able to talk. And over time, it's really changed. People are much more open about it. 3 years ago, it was so much harder. I struggled to get even the few coffee hosts that I had, starting out. And now there's people joining us every day and getting in touch, and everyone's happy to talk about it. And like others have said here, men are so open about it too, and about approaching us and asking for information to support their wives or their line reports or anybody in their lives really who's going through menopause.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, I think it's really see from your numbers the success that you've had. So I think that's really positive. Abby, very, very quickly, I just wondered if you'd had any different methods for sort of how you've raised awareness and embedded all of this as the norm in your business. We actually only have a couple of minutes, so it'd be apologies for making you go fast. But yes, any other advice you'd like to give?
I think there's a wider conversation about communication in any organisation that comes with awareness. But for provision of a quick answer, I think you've got to be clear about who you want to target, what the message is. One of the few great ways that are not necessarily resource intensive, our wellbeing page on the hub, blogs, internal newsletters, sharing real life stories was touched on early. I mean, I think that resonates for people from all different diverse perspectives as well. And I think one great tip is not only supporting days like Menopause World Day, but including menstrual health and perimenopause as topics for other awareness days and events that the organisation might already be supporting. LGBTQIA+, Black History Month, autism, disability. There's always, you can get the views of those groups on the menopause topic, and cross-network groups working is therefore a great tool, as are the networks, as my colleagues have touched on as well. And I think also you need to keep aware of your organisation, but through surveys and publicising the results, showing what you've done with that information can be a way to reintroduce the topic and awareness again, and of course embedding into current policies, training, and inductions. Just, you know, I think it comes from there's a constant message from senior leaders down.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're right on our end time, so I just want to officially thank all of our panelists for their time, their effort, their contribution, the work they've done with us at BSI in the standard, but also in their continuing sort of evangelism out there in the business world to actually make a difference for, you know, 50% of our workforce and this huge skill set that we have. And if we can empower them to stay in business longer, so much the better. The fact that all this information is available for free, picking up on what Helen and the Minister said, means there is actually no excuse for ignoring it anymore, and that's really what we should be saying to everyone. So thank you, panelists, for all your time. Thank you to you who've joined us, and we hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to continuing the discussion on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.